thanks to the North Carolina Arboretum and Malaprops for joining with the press and hosting Lytton, Musselman, and Peter Schafran, authors of the new UNC Press title, Edible Wild Plants of the Carolinas. I'm particularly grateful for this partnership that is ongoing, and there's a certain synergy, I think, that happens when these three organizations come together. I am privileged to be a member of the UNC Press Advancement Council and to tell you a little bit about the press, which publishes books, about 125 every year, which puts us on pace for about one book every 3 days.
Wow.
And these are quality books. Well over half win awards each year, awards such as the National Book Award, the Pulitzer Prize in History, and the Bancroft Prize. These award-winning books represent the heart of the University Press Publishing, books written by leading scholars for use in the academy. But as a part of the state's great public university system, the press also serves the people of the state by publishing general interest books on North Carolina and American South, history, culture, flora, and fauna. Tonight's book is one such title. As a press, we have much to celebrate. We are turning 100 next year, having been founded in 1922. No other institution does what UNC Press does for our state. Through its numerous awards and reviews, the name of the press and the name of the university are carried across the country and around the globe, exemplifying the university's sterling reputation for excellence. It is most assuredly a state treasure. Now, like so many others in this pandemic, I have discovered anew the joy of hiking, a feeling grounded in these mountains of Western North Carolina, a feeling connected to my surroundings in ways I don't think I ever fully appreciated. Given the fragility of systems we have come to rely on, such as supply chains, it seems more important than ever to learn about the foods all around us, if only we have eyes to see. And especially in this age of growing dependency on industrially produced foods, we are quickly losing our knowledge of the more immediate natural world. So this evening's presentation is one of special turn the program over to our authors. Lytton John Musselman is the Mary Payne Hogan Distinguished Professor of Botany at Old Dominion University. And Peter Schafran is a postdoctoral scientist at the Boyce Thompson Institute in Ithaca, New York. So welcome to you both. And now I'm happy to turn the program over to Lytton and Peter.
Thank you, Kirk. We're very glad to be here tonight to talk about a book that's been on our working list for several years, working together, munching our way across the state, from the coast to the mountains, testing and trying different foods and sharing that with students. I'm speaking to you from Norfolk, Virginia, where we did a lot of the work in Virginia and North Carolina and South Carolina, and are very excited to share this with you because we think we have some things which need to be emphasized more in the foraging world. And we'll talk about those, including making some special drinks from these plants. So I'd like to introduce my co-author, Peter Schaffer. Where are you, Peter? Are you on board?
Yep, thank you, Lytton. I'm joining you from Ithaca, New York, where the flora is a bit different. I'm definitely missing the plants down there in the south.
So shall we begin our foraging through the book? Okay, so I'm going to share the screen here now, and I don't want to dump myself like I did before. Stephanie, you've disabled the screen sharing. Is Stephanie around?
Yeah, you should be good now. It's just because you went out and came back in. Sorry about that.
Okay, it's okay. You're forgiven. Okay. Is the screen, can you see the screen?
Not yet.
How about now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Well, here's a little blurb on the book. And I want to say something about UNC Press, if I may, Kirk. I've worked with several university presses, and the extensive editing and careful editing and background information that the editors have put into this book is really amazing. I would commend their work to any other interested authors. So there's the book. You've heard about the book. Nobody's ever seen one because of the supply chain problem. And what we're going to do now is give you a little overview of some of the plants we've worked with, some of the products that they've made. We'll divide this into two parts. I'll do the introduction and then some of the plants, and then Peter will come on board with what's really important, the alcohol that you can make from plants. First of all, the bad news, and that is that if you're foraging, you've got to know what you're foraging. There's been so many poisoning cases with mushrooms in this past year that we want to make sure that people are very careful about what they collect. If you don't know it, don't eat it. So, and here's the fields you have to deal with. Some of them are fungi, some of them are toxic for ingestion. This is the ergot fungus, which is quite common on grasses. This picture was taken in Alaska, but here's one on the coastal plant, the salt marsh spartina. These are very powerful concentrations of LSD, which some students have taken to get a trip. And turned out it was a trip to the emergency room, some of them on intensive care for some time because of the other toxins that are there. Everybody knows about poison ivy. You'll need a notion of calamine lotion if you get into this. People's sensitivity varies from age to, it varies during season, it varies from plant to plant. So as the old saying says, leaflets of 3, let it be. Here you can see it in the summer and on this tree in the winter condition. It's dermatitis causing in both stages. Poison oak is less common, but it occurs widely throughout the area. And it's a shrub, not a climbing vine like poison ivy, and it causes the same problems. Probably less familiar is poison sumac, which is found, for example, in Carolina bays and other, in the dismal swamp. It's a tall shrub with pinnately compound leaves, easily distinguished from the others, but also containing urushiol that causes that immune response to the toxin. So let's have some Socratic learning. Here is Socrates in his last days as he's drinking the cup of poison because he was trying to pollute the youth of the day. Sounds like a familiar theme. This is the poison sumac. In the past several years, I've seen it spreading all over the place, particularly in the mountains. Really is a booming population. You can recognize it by the purple spots on the stem. The leaves and the flowers look a lot like Queen Anne's lace, and it's been confused with Queen Anne's lace to the detriment of those who eat it. It's very toxic. The compound that is such bad news is called coneine, and it affects the central nervous system. Bad news. It's native to Western Eurasia and Europe. However, this is a native plant, water hemlock, common throughout the Carolinas. This was taken in Chowan County and in northern North Carolina, near the Virginia border. Very common, flowers later in the year. These plants are bad news. You need to know what you're collecting when you're going foraging. So let's talk a little bit about the menu, what we're going to give you tonight. I want to emphasize again that we're talking about plants that are rarely included in regional treatments. You might find them in some obscure publications, but in the more common manuals for edible wild plants, a lot of them aren't there. What we've done tonight is we've selected representative samples of these often common but overlooked plants. How do you know if a plant's edible or not? Well, as we tell students, any plant's edible once. But how do you predict? How do you find out what might be edible? One way is to look at plants in the same family or the same genus and see how they're used. So when I was working in Tanzania a couple of years ago, I was amazed to see this plant being touted as a vegetable that is very high in minerals and vitamins for the small holders in rural Africa. It's called Nidoscalus aconifolius, or the common name is chaya. It's actually native to Central America, but is now promoted to the World Vegetable Center and other organizations as a plant that can produce a lot of nutritious food by eating the leaves. Again, they contain large quantities of vitamins and other minerals, particularly zinc, which is missing in a lot of the tropical African soils. So there it is. There's the African plant. And here's the North Carolina plant, the bull thistle. Now, what you'll notice immediately is that this is loaded with prickles. And these will inject your skin with an irritant. It's not like poison ivy. It's not an immunological response. It's a mechanical puncture of your skin. So I was hesitant to try this. So I had some student volunteers collect it and cook it and try it. And since they weren't taken to the hospital, I tried collecting some myself. And it's tasty. It's really good. All parts of the plant are edible. These are the clusters of flowers. You can see those white clusters of flowers. The roots are also edible, and the fruits are edible. They're hard to harvest because they're so prickly, but if you can get them, put them into a paper bag. They're explosive. That's how the seeds are distributed, but they're really tasty. They're tasty raw, taste somewhat like peanuts, and they're tasty when they're roasted. If you collect them and roast them, you have to be very careful not to overheat them because the oils will burn. Bull thistle, bull nettle is the common name of it. Here's another plant which is very common in North Carolina, parts of North Carolina, the pickerel weed. It's unusual in that the fruits develop underwater. The flowers are like any other terrestrial flower, pollinated by various insects. And then as the fruits develop, they are bent down towards or into the water. You can harvest tons of these if you have the right equipment and there's a student volunteer to help you with it. And here's what you get. These are the masses of fruits on the infructescence. These are the individual fruits. And the seeds, these small seeds about the size of a grain of rice, are edible. What do they taste like? Thunderously unremarkable, I would say. Like so many edible wild plants, part of the lore is in the preparation of them, and simply the fact that you can take something that looks like it doesn't deserve attention as a food and make it into a food. Pickerel weed. One of the surprises we found in this project was the production of okra-like fruits. Now, as I tell people, I was born in America, and then I moved to North Carolina to go to school at Chapel Hill. So I had never encountered okra. Shocking as it may seem, now one of my favorite vegetables. Okra is actually in the genus Hibiscus, Hibiscus esculentus. So there was a possibility that the fruits of this plant were also edible. This is very common in wetlands in the sunny, bright sunny areas in North Carolina. This is less common, but not a rare plant. How do you fix it? Well, first of all, you need to get it when it's very, very young. These are the buds, obviously. And at this stage, you can see how tiny that is. You cut it and you can treat it like okra. And it even has the mucilage, the slime that characterizes okra. That's a fun plant to deal with, and it's common and easily prepared. I'm going to talk about some forgotten plants. One of the things that one encounters after getting into foraging is the role of Native Americans in the selection of these edible wild plants. We often think of Native Americans sort of in the iconic image of a brave on a pony with a feather headdress carrying a spear. But actually, there was the Native Americans developed a set of crops, which the anthropologists call the Eastern Agricultural Complex. They include such familiar things as gourds and sunflowers, Coelianthus tuberosus, and other well-known plants, and some that are not so well known, like the sumpweed, Iva annua, a relative of ragweed, and the pit seed goosefoot, great name there. Here's the Iva annua. If you look at the distribution in North Carolina, you'll see that it's quite infrequent. The question is it native or was it being cultivated by Native Americans and escaped? This is the Chenopodium berlanderii. If you are a wild food forager, you've collected lamb's quarters, one of the tastiest of our edible greens. This can be confused with it, but its habitat is much different. Here you can see it growing, it's growing on a beach along the saltwater. These are very nutritious. If you look here at the pit seed goosefoot, this is the total amount of protein in a measure of the pit seed goosefoot. More than 16% protein. That's great for a grain. Remember that quinoa is also in the same genus. And the Iva annua, again, almost 15% of the seed, technically a fruit, is protein. Here you can see the Chenopodium, and here you can see the Iva fruits. Now, the problem with these is processing these small seeds. And basically, you can eat the Chenopodium as it is. The Iva takes a little more preparation. There was a variety of Iva annua that the Native Americans had, which is now extinct. It just simply disappeared because no one was cultivating it. The last Native American food I want to mention is perhaps better known, called canuche, however it's pronounced, made from hickories. In the Carolinas, there's two groups of hickories, those that are very bitter and those which are more palatable. And what we've selected here are the red hickory and the mockernut hickory. And you harvest the nuts, which have a very thick shell relative to the size of the meat. You harvest the nuts, you let them dry for a day or so that the meat will separate from the hard wooden part. Then you pound it and you put it through a sieve to take out the big pieces of the woody part. And then you put it into a plastic bag or a cloth bag and you pound it with a mallet so that you break up all of the little pieces of shell so that you can eat it. This is loaded with oil. If you take this mass of pounded nut here, and you boil it, the layer of the water will be covered with an oil, a very rich, pleasant tasting. I don't know how I describe the flavor. It's sort of it's a little bit sweet, but it makes a very good, it's very good when it's mixed with something like hominy, and edible, and not only edible, but very nutritious. You can form it into balls like this because of the oil, the pieces stick together, and you can freeze it and keep it for several months. Last of all is, what about the ethics of collecting? Well, first of all, you need permission. The reason that so many questions came up about ethical foraging is because of what happened during the pandemic, when people would foraging a lot more than they were in previous years because they'd go to grocery stores and there were bare shelves. Some of them began to get panicky about food. So know the regulations for collecting. Obviously, you want permission from private landowners, particularly those who have shotguns, but you also need to check on the state and federal regulations. Our experience has been that if you talk to the state or Nature Conservancy people or the Fish and Wildlife people, National Forestry people, National Park people, tell them what you're doing, they will give you permission to collect. In certain national forests, and it varies from national forests to others, foraging is simply allowed. You don't need to get permission for foraging for yourself. You can't go into the pickup truck and haul out hickory nuts, but to collect a portion for yourself is okay. Conservation, you need to preserve a portion of the population. This is especially true of perennials, things like spring beauty, ramps, and other things that have bulbs, or as they say in North Carolina, bulbs. And those that have those bulbs can be destroyed. The population can be destroyed if you dig up the bulbs. So leave some of it, of the plants that are there. The Cherokee had a custom when they harvested ramps of not pulling up the plants, but simply cutting the leaves. And leave some for other people. we're not into mostly in the United States, we're not into foraging for survival. We're doing it because we love plants and we want to learn about plants and because it's interesting. Lastly, there's been a big emphasis now on the role of colonialism in the way people viewed plants. And if we are going to use plants that other people have pioneered with, we need to acknowledge that. The example that comes to my mind is what's used in gumbo filet. Filet is made from the dried young buds of the sassafras. And we usually attribute it to the Cajuns in Louisiana. Actually, it was the Creek people from the Creek Nation in the Gulf area who showed the settlers what they should be using for cooking. So take people's culture into account, acknowledge it, and respect areas that are considered holy. If you've been to the American West, you may have been to some regions where there are, like I'm thinking of the Devil's Tower in Wyoming, where around that fantastic landform, there are trees which are marked with tags and ribbons. These are considered holy places for some of the local people to guard their spirits or mark a place where somebody's buried. So take that into account. Okay, now we're going to turn it over to Peter and hear what he has to say, which I think you'll find particularly interesting. I stop the share here now.
Yes, thank you. All set, Peter.
All right. Okay, thank you, Lytton. So I want to continue on this general theme of underappreciated plants that we've tried to focus on. And one of the groups that we have included in the book are a few examples of grains. And of course, everybody knows grains. That technically speaking, these are the fruits of grasses. And the big three that you see on this slide here are some of the most important plants in the world. They're literally the basis of civilization. But wild grains, of which there are hundreds of species of grasses, you can find it, and they're basically ignored as far as foraging usually goes. And that's for a pretty good reason, because for the most part, they are incredibly small and they take so much work to prepare. As an example of 3 different grasses here, as you can see, the grains that we've extracted are incredibly small. You have to collect bags and bags of these plants just to grind enough of these to get a cup of flour. But it's a good experience. It really makes you appreciate the work that ancient people did domesticating these so that we don't have to rely on these little tiny things. And it also makes you appreciate why, for the Native Americans, the things like acorns and hickories were also a more important source of starch than these type of grains. There is one, however, that is worth collecting if you can get it. There are a few species of what are called cane or switch cane or giant cane around different parts of the South. And these are the species of Arundinaria. And this is in a group of bamboo-like grasses. And they all share this character of their life history where they will go years without producing fruit, like growing these large colonies. And it can be decades while they grow sterilely until they eventually produce their fruit, and then the entire colony will die. But if you can catch a colony in a year when it's producing these grains, this is a great wild food. The grains themselves are as large as a grain of rice or even larger, and they just produce tons and tons of grains. You'll see the canes just bent over to the ground with these. So if you're lucky enough to find this, then it's a great thing to collect, and you can get truckloads of it and freeze it and save it for years. The other thing to mention is the more obvious one, which is wild rice, which has been covered extensively in other foraging books, so we don't talk about it here. Another unique aspect that we try to cover are some alcoholic beverages that we've been testing, which we call either cordials or aperitifs, depending not on whether it's sweetened with sugar or whether it's or not. And the cordials tend to be fruit-based, whereas our aperitifs are herbal generally. And the preparation for these is pretty straightforward. If it's a cordial, we'll take a cup of fruit, mix 2 tablespoons of sugar, mix it well, and then through osmosis, and over time, the syrup or juice will be drawn out of the fruits. And then you simply strain that or filter it out and mix it with vodka. And then the aperitifs are even more straightforward. You just take the leaves or flowers or whatever plant part is appropriate for a particular plant, and soak it in vodka, and usually for a couple weeks to a month, sometimes longer. And then you can sort of dilute it to taste. The video there is showing an example preparation that I did with a chokeberry, which is straightforward: washing the fruit, adding the sugar, then letting it sit, and you can see the juice that's extracted. And that seems to be important as opposed to just crushing the fruits, which could let out some unpleasant flavor properties. And then at the end, the effect of filtering, which is optional, but it's makes it more attractive. And we've been experimenting with about 200 or so different preparations, a few of which the best ones we include in the book. And some of those were quite surprising. One example is this deerberry, Vaccinium Staminium, which is a green blueberry. Those fruits pictured there are actually fully ripe. And they're not very pleasant to eat raw. They're quite sour. They can be a bit bitter. But we found that it makes a really delicious cordial with a very nice fruity flavor to it, using that standard preparation. This is consistently one of the highest rated cordials that in our various taste tests that we've held. Another similar example is the red chokeberry or Beautifulia. You can guess from the name that the berries are not very good to eat raw. They're very astringent. You can think something like an unripe pawpaw, if you've had one of those before, or excuse me, persimmon. But again, our preparation method produces a cordial which has a very nice cinnamon flavor to it. And one of the other themes of our work is that with wild plants, there's a lot of variability. It's not like cultivated things where everything's been bred to be very consistent. And so I have to make an admission here that in the book, there's a passage I wrote about a related species, the black chokeberry, which we tried before and tasted awful. But I've tried a different batch again this year, and it actually came out pretty good. So one of the other takeaway messages should be that experimentation is always encouraged, as long as you, of course, know that the plant you're working with is safe. And then one of our herbal preparations is the wild bergamot, Monarda fistulosa. And this is in the mint family, as you can probably guess. And this does indeed have a very strong menthol flavor. So one of those ones that some people like it a lot, some people don't like it very much. And although we're not into sort of blending and mixology and those types of things, we've been told that this one would be a good base for mixing with some of these other preparations. So that might be something to try. We also have some resources on the internet that we want to highlight here. one of the things nowadays that you don't have to worry about is, when you publish a book, it's sort of set in stone, but these online resources are continually updated and provide new things that you can use to help you. So the first is the Old Dominion University plant site. The URL is there, and that is mostly Lytton's photographs of plants going back decades. And so you can find additional photos of some of the plants in the book, as well as other plants from all over the world there. And you can be confident in their identification as opposed to just Googling random things. And another thing that we've developed for this is some maps for the plants that are in the book. And as opposed to the more traditional maps just showing where the plants are known to occur at any particular time, these are species distribution maps that are actually continually updated and modeled from data. And it's data that you can actually help contribute and to improve some of these. So I'm going to explain this a little bit. And then this is my website where these maps are hosted. This is what you'll see if you go there. The plants are ordered alphabetically by their species name. And in each one of those thumbnail pictures, you can click on to open a high resolution image of each map. And so what I do is from these big biological databases, iNaturalist, GBIF, and iDigBio, you can download all of the known locations where each species occurs, and then combine it with the WorldClim database, which are several environmental factors that are mapped throughout the Carolinas. And then using some sophisticated modeling, you can combine those two to predict where the best habitat is for each particular species. And it seems to work pretty well. For things like ramps, which have a very limited range in the mountains, on the top left there, you can see in the green indicates the area where is most likely to be suitable habitat, and then decreasing through yellow to red and eventually white where there's non-suitable habitat. And it works for wide-ranging things like the Carolina geranium, but there are a few plants there like the pitseed goosefoot where the data are really limited. Those red dots are the actual data points, and you can see there are very few of them for pitseed goosefoot. And so we just really need to get some more data to improve our model of the species habitat. And so how can you contribute the data? The easiest way is the iNaturalist app, which many of you are probably familiar with. You can either use your phone or you can use the website to upload pictures of plants. You take a picture with your phone in the field, and then when you upload it through the app, it will automatically pull the GPS information and can even guess the identity of the plant if you're not sure. And then it will be sent to the community, and other people can either confirm your identification or they can help to improve it if it's incorrect identification. And in particular, so non-cultivated plants are important. These need to be plants that are growing in the wild, not in gardens, botanical gardens. And then once other people agree with the identification and it's considered research grade, that's when I will include it in my modeling. And then one of the other things you'll notice as you look at them is that really the area around the big cities, Charlotte and the Triangle, are pretty saturated with common observations, the common plants. So if you can get away from the cities and do some exploring out in the countryside, that will contribute the most valuable data. And then if any of you are associated with herbaria, you can make sure that your herbarium is contributing data to either GBIF or iDigBio, get those records up there. Another thing that you can do is then investigate the data. If you're familiar with some of these plants, you might notice that there are some of these dots that seem like they're out of place. This is an example here of Amelanchier obovalis, the coastal plains serviceberry, but there's one occurrence all the way out near Asheville in the mountains, which doesn't seem like it should be the case with something called the coastal plains serviceberry. So let's look into this. So each one of these databases has a website where you can look through the records. And I was able to find this one on the GBIF website. And you can see their maps here, the point that's out near Asheville. And then I could look up the original record that that point came from, and it happens to be an herbarium specimen, the Chapel Hill Herbarium. And then this one even happened to have a picture that I could look up, and I could even see the label there describing the plant and who collected it. And so based on the description, as well as knowing that these two collectors are very good Carolina botanists, I can say with some confidence that this probably is the Amelanchier obovalis and is the right species, and just happens to be a disjunct population out there in the mountains. So just to wrap up, we have to thank many, many people who've helped us. We've been doing this for a lot of years now. We've had so many people who've helped us find plants out in the field, landowners, as Lytton mentioned, who've allowed us to go and collect, and also to the staff at UNC Press, who've been so helpful in the process of creating this book. And then lots and lots of students who've been pressed into service, doing a lot of the dirty work, as you can see there, digging in muddy ditches for these roots that are then preparing. And as a final disclaimer, we just have to make sure that you know that no undergraduates were harmed in the course of this work. And with that, find the button to stop sharing, and I think we'll turn it over for Q&A.
There we go. I am glad to join you, and I thank Peter and Lytton for talking about their wonderful book with us tonight. My name is Rebecca Caldwell, and I manage adult education programs at the North Carolina Arboretum. We're very happy to co-sponsor, along with UNC Press, our co-affiliate in the UNC system, and with Malaprops, our wonderful local independent bookstore here that we all treasure so much in downtown Asheville. I'll also introduce Katie Gorman, who is our adult education programs assistant and works with us at the Arboretum, leading a number of field experiences and classes. Just to say a little bit about our programs, we offer about 300 classes a year, and I'm so fascinated to hear Lytton and Peter talk about their work with students. We have a number of classes in flora identification, as well as tree identification, mushroom identification, and a number of other classes as well. We have 2 Certificate of Merit programs, the Blue Ridge Naturalist program and the Blue Ridge Eco Gardener program. Both of these programs are filled with students who are fascinated with the idea of foraging and with learning more at this time. And so I know that the Southern Gateways guide that you have put together will be very useful to them as they do some identification. And botany is a real cornerstone of that course. So I'm very glad to be able to start off our questions tonight. We have a number of questions, as I anticipated, in the chat, and I'll ask Katie to jump in and make sure that I don't miss any in getting these questions out to you, Peter and Lytton. The first one, of course, I think we're all very curious about your recipe testing when you were talking about producing cordials and other dishes. How much time did you devote to recipe testing for the book?
Well, nothing that's in the book has not been ingested by one or both of us. So if it is toxic, it's a very slow toxin that's involved because we've been doing this over a period of years. I'm not exactly sure what is meant by how much time. Do you mean how many recipes did we test, or how do we allot time for testing recipes? I'm not quite
Well,
clear on what.
Lytton, since we don't actually since we don't have the book in hand at this point and we're eagerly anticipating it, why don't you tell us a little bit about the recipes that are included in the book, how the number of recipes that you include, and just what you did as a process of testing these recipes
Well,
for.
it's very easy to answer the first question. There's no recipes in the book, except the cordials are a recipe, I suppose, and there might be
Yeah.
one or two things, but we make the point that it's not a recipe book. It's a book for, I think the book says, we'll point out the plants, you make the recipes. There's a couple of recipes from Native Americans, but it is not a recipe book. That would be in an earlier book that I did with a student called Quick Guide to Edible Plants, which has lots of recipes in it. But our emphasis was on getting into the field and seeing the plants, experiencing the plants, using your own imagination and how they might be prepared.
Mhm. The next question in the chat is where, with which plants do you suggest people start if they are new to foraging, especially in Western North Carolina?
Peter, you want to handle that one? I guess Peter's not here.
I'm just muted. Yeah, that's a great question. And there's so many things you could start with. I think it's easiest to probably start with some of the plants that are probably most distinguishable or easily recognized, I would say, by somebody who's not an experienced forager. So that might include things like wild blueberries, because most people are probably familiar with the store blueberries, and wild blueberries are going to look fairly similar. They vary from species to species, but overall, same general shape, color more or less, except for the deerberry, of course. Other things, particularly in Western North Carolina, might be things like ramps, which are so popular, and may be over collected. I'm not exactly sure there. But those are very distinctive early spring foraging item that's easy to identify by the leaves, the time of year, the strong oniony smell. Hard to confuse that with anything else. Any other ideas, Lytton?
You might want to think about things that leaves, because there are so many weedy things like at the edge of fields and so forth, that like amaranths and goosefoot and those kinds of things, which you can easily recognize and harvest and not damage the population by harvesting them.
I appreciated what you said, especially Lytton, about the ethics of collecting and ethical foraging, and particularly citing ramps. Both of you citing ramps in your remarks tonight, and talking about how the Cherokee harvest ramps in terms of leaving the bulb for the plant's survival and just cutting the leafy tops. And a lot of times you'll see at different markets people who have gone ahead and pulled up the bulbs and are I worry about that when I see it. But can you expand a little bit more on the notion of ethical harvesting? Because of course in Western North Carolina this is sometimes a serious issue, and also one that has serious uh, um, it has serious consequences for someone who's caught when they're foraging illegally. So I'll ask you to comment on that.
Well, don't we have to ask why we forage? Why would this audience forage? Foraging is really, if we want to put it in sort of sociological terms, it's not for people who are living in inner cities and can't get transport, don't have the clothing or the means to get there and do the harvesting. So bearing that in mind, I think should shape how we deal with this. So I read these terrible things, a vast phyticide in West Virginia, Ramps Festival. You know, it seems like the ramps are harvested by bulldozers sometimes. It's so damaging to the mountainsides where the erosion is going to be greater because of the slope. So if we follow the example of some of our predecessors on the land, like Native Americans, who had such a respect, some of you may know Robin Kimmerer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, who I have the privilege of knowing and actually taught her course one summer in New York State. She always has a philosophy: if you take something, you should leave something, so that you have that respect for the land. And to develop that is kind of hard in an American consumerism, where the idea is to get as much as you can, as fast as you can, as cheap as you can. And I think we have to be careful not to apply that to wild food harvesting. This is an area that is receiving a lot of attention from ethicists and foragers, and it is something that needs to be addressed. And I must say, UNC Press was very sensitive about this. They said, you want to include something about ethical foraging, and that's such a right approach. So it's that kind of mindset I think that we need to see, to respect the land, respect the plant. The reason that I like foraging is, I just have to tell you right up front, confess in front of everybody, I'm a plant junkie. I love plants. I'm fascinated by their form and function and the way they're used. And I think that foraging for me is a way to know plants in a more intimate way, and get to really know about them. So you don't want to destroy something you love.
Absolutely. It's wonderful that you invoke Robin Wall Kimmerer as well, with the notion of the gift economy and the reciprocity, and being attuned to the land and what the land needs, as well as the wildlife, the other than human inhabitants of the land as well, to be able to sustain life. I will ask Kirk to unmute. He had a question for us that he was going to ask. Kirk?
Thank you, Rebecca. And thank you, Lytton and Peter. What an informative and inspiring evening this has been already. I guess the word that comes to my mind, and summing so much of this up, is partnership. There's the partnership, obviously, at work, just in putting together an event like this, with the authors, with Malaprops, with the Arboretum, UNC Press, but all partnership with the cosmos around us. And my question really has to do with where we go from here. We're all eager to get our hands on the book and to actually to see it, to read it, and are eager for its arrival. But Rebecca may have already answered my question, which was how the novice like me, just learning about these things, goes about cultivating a deeper appreciation, a deeper interest. And I think the classes at the Arboretum are one answer, but I'm just wondering if you have other thoughts about what you would like to see happen as a result of the publication of your book.
A very poignant question, an important question. First of all, I think that one of the things which we shapes our thinking is how we view the natural world. As Christians, we should view it in a certain way, because it's God's handiwork. There's an environmental movement among Muslims that I've been peripherally involved with. So it's our philosophical basis the morality that is instilled in us. I think that it plays a big role. The students have been mentioned. I've been in this business a long time. I have ABS, aging botanist syndrome, but I'm still teaching. And I find that students find edible plants intrinsically interesting. I can't explain, honestly can't explain why, but you take some of these kids who've never been out in the woods, you talk about plants like smilax, for example. You can eat the tips of smilax, and they find that so fascinating. I mean, what's the basis of that? Is it something primeval in our being? So I think getting young people involved is one of the places that we need to begin. And there's a book some of you may know called Last Child in the Woods by Loy, who points out that nowadays parents are sometimes so skittish about letting their kids go roaming around through the woods, the fields, and learning about wildlife firsthand, plants and animals firsthand. And I think as we retreat into the cities more and the foraging becomes the purview of the entitled, we've really got to address that at the most basic issue, and that would have to be with students.
Well, I'm going to actually chime in and ask Katie to comment on that because as an environmental educator and someone who has come up through, first of all, discovery camps at the Arboretum, and then continues to work as an environmental educator and a biologist. Katie, comment on your experience coming up as a child in the woods and invited really to explore and taste and touch and smell.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, like Rebecca said, yeah, I went to camps starting when I was 5 at the Arboretum. And yeah, while I was there, it was just really an avenue for me to connect with nature. And while I was there, you know, I was taught about sourwood and other things that were fairly easy for us to recognize. And they just became, I don't know, I guess as a child it was cool because then I could go to my school and show, you know, my friends there who didn't know about it, like, oh yeah, this is a leaf that you can eat. So yeah, from that it became really interesting, and I just always was really connected with nature. Obviously I still feel that way, and because that was such a good experience for me, that's why I'm happy to continue at the Arboretum. And yeah, it's been really interesting also with Rebecca to continue in adult ed to see that whole other side of people who want to continue learning and take classes as adults and either stay connected with nature or even get reconnected with nature if they haven't been able to, which I think has been happening a lot.
Especially in the...
May I share a comment that an educator shared with me? I absolutely love it. My students hear it all the time. My job as a botanist, a teaching botanist, is to teach students to read nature in the language in which it was written.
Mm-hmm.
I love that because as we just heard, the idea that you can go into a woods or field and you have friends there, plants and animals that you know about. Yeah, it's exciting.
Yeah, definitely.
And not to be fearful, but to have a sense of invitation to be able to experience these things as well. So, and to do it judiciously and cautiously, as you indicate, because there are inherent dangers as well. I was interested in Peter's comments when he was talking about the sarvisberry, or the sarvisberry, as we say in Western North Carolina. But we actually have quite a few sarvisberry trees at the Arboretum as well, and the wildlife love them. So it's another wonderful gloss on what you're writing about in the book to understand that it's interspecies in terms of how we rely on and depend on these plants for our survival as well. Are there any other questions that we have coming in from the chat or from the panel? any other comments, Peter and Lytton, about the book and about your work, and maybe even what's next for you?
I think one of the things which an arboretum can do, or actually landscape manager for a university, as we're doing here, is plant native plants. One of the plants is planted all over our campus now is Amelanchier, as we would call it in Wisconsin, Juneberry, or as they call it in Canada, Saskatoon. And the kids see these. One of our students collected 90 pounds of Amelanchier fruits on campus. So as we make these plants familiar to students, it's a way of getting them interested into the field.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and as far as what comes next for us, one of the things that we used to be involved a lot with was holding, courses, workshops to help people get their foot in the door with foraging, because it can be very intimidating if you've never done it before and just going out and eating wild plants. And hopefully sometime soon we'll be able to do that kind of thing again.
Well, I think you can probably count on an invitation from the Arboretum
We'll take it.
to come and great to come and teach with us there, and of course to be able to share this wonderful Southern Gateways guide as part of this series. And in the meantime, even though you really don't, we may not have too many recipes, I think you've given me sufficient incentive to be able to try red chokeberry cordial at some point in time, because I love chokeberries, so do the birds. But I want to thank you both for coming, and I also want to thank Kirk for talking about UNC Press. It's wonderful to be able to have this connection with our co-affiliate in the UNC system, with UNC Press, and to be able to anticipate their 100th anniversary of this venerable press in the coming year, which is also when we'll get Peter and Lytton back to teach with us, I hope, in Western North Carolina. I'll ask Stephanie to come back on and tell us a little bit more information about ordering the book, and being able to have it just in time for our fellow foragers for the holidays.
Thank you, Rebecca. I want to also say thank you again to everyone. Thank you, Kirk, for being here on behalf of UNC Press. Thank you, Rebecca and Katie, for being here on behalf of the North Carolina Arboretum and moderating the Q&A. And of course, deep thanks to Lytton and Peter for making this wonderful foraging guide for folks, and for spending some time with us this evening to give us a little introduction to the book and share your thoughts. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, thank you. You're most welcome. We've been happy to have you. When it comes to the book, I'll just say that we're waiting for books to come in, and we've ordered some books. I know everyone out there is doing everything they can to get the books in, and a couple of people, I think even probably Kirk previously even mentioned the supply chain, which is are two words that I don't think were sort of in the common lexicon until recently, but they are now, right? It's in the news. And so I think that's what's going on. So what I would like to do is encourage folks, if you are excited about this book, as I think you should be, and would like to have it, I would encourage you, if you have the means, to go ahead and order it from Malaprops if you're local, and we will get the book in as soon as humanly possible and get it into your hands. It is forthcoming, and we do have a special offer for you if you order it in connection with the event and order it by Sunday and enter the coupon code Arboretum. at the checkout, you can also get 10% off of the book. So if you go ahead and essentially pre-order it, and then we can call you and let you know when it comes in. You can come in later and pick it up, when we're getting it in as well, but that's a little extra incentive to go ahead and do it now. But it's a book that we'll continue to carry for sure, because we know that it's going to be a useful guide that a lot of folks in our area will be interested in using. And thank you all. And thanks for your patience on that. And thanks to UNC Press. I know that UNC Press is working to get a lot of really amazing books out right now. And I know it's on the way. Rebecca, I will punt back to you to close us out officially.
All right. Just to expand a little bit on what Stephanie was saying, and to give you a little bit more information about the book itself, the Southern Gateways series, the guides, are wonderful field guides. They're a great size to be able to take with you as you're on the trail. And this book in particular is put together so beautifully in terms of full color photos that make it really easy to identify edible plants, which is always very important. And then you get also profiles of more than 100 plants, about 125 plants or so, that are organized by food type, I think, as Lytton had said in his introduction, and looking also at seeds, fruits, grains, and shoots in connection with that. So that'll give you an idea as to what it is that you can look forward to with this edible wild plants of the Carolinas. And then we will certainly hope to see you at some point at the Arboretum. We've been appreciative of your support through this time, and we have been appreciative of the many ways that we could extend our mission to make connections between people, plants, and places, particularly this place, which is a biologically diverse and a precious heritage that we preserve in so many ways in this part of the country. And as you had also said in your remarks, Peter and Lytton, that what we love, we protect, and what we recognize, we develop a love and a deep appreciation for. So thank you for being with us tonight to give us more information about these edible wild plants of the Carolinas and responsible foraging. We appreciate all of you who have been with us tonight, and we wish you well during this time.